Good morning. Thank you, Solaris, and thank you for having me. And now that I know where you're situated, it's like going home again. So you're going to be one of my favorites, I'm sure. I'm
Great.
sorry to hear about the fire. I lived through so many of those in Colorado, New Mexico, that kind of, that kind of stuff. And you're right about the firefighters. There's in Sun Thief, the fellow who, one of the characters is a firefighter like that, putting out wildfires. So I have nothing but respect for the people who go in and try to stop those things because, now that, we're talking about a camper-started fire, which is not at all unusual in the West. However, the fires burn, the fires rage with an intensity that firefighters will tell you that they've never seen before, and that has to do with decades of dropping aluminum from the skies that is now underground and in the roots of trees and things. And the levels of fire are demonic now. They're very difficult to put out because aluminum is an accelerant. And in fact, the roots of trees burn long after it looks like the fire's out, which is odd, isn't it? But that's because the aluminum's underground now. So fires are, fires are a lot more dangerous than they used to be. So everybody take care in northern Colorado.
Yes, thank you so much. And when you're so right about the aluminum, I know we could probably touch on the chemtrails and what they've pretty much done insofar as biochemical warfare and all the aerosols that they're spraying and contaminating. I don't know if you want to go in that area. We have so many topics to discuss tonight, so I'm going to kind of let you lead and you decide where you want to go, but I have plenty of questions. So.
Well, sure, and those are always good too. Love those. I depend on those to direct me because I get off on tangents anyway, but the reality, I think the thing that I'd like to bring right now, first and foremost, is, well, there's really two things. First of all, there's Dangerous Imagination, Silent Assimilation is a book that I was writing with Harold Kautzvella, and it's a very important book, and I hope everybody has a chance to get a look at it because it's a no excuses book, and it goes to the social engineering of the 20th century and how that led us to become the people who would allow and even participate in a phenomenon like dropping chemicals on ourselves and our families and our fellow men, which there's a whole lot more raining down on us than aluminum, strontium, barium, arsenic, those sorts of things, which we can talk about at some point here. And I can always come back and we can do themes as well because my work is starting to become rather, lengthy and varied, and I think that happens to anybody who starts to understand the enormity of and the complexity of the web that's surrounding us. It's really on all fronts that we're being controlled, and the attempt to manipulate us. Anyway, Dangerous Imagination, Silent Assimilation, as I said, is a combination of the social engineering from the 20th century. It reached a true art during the 20th century, and of course it's still ongoing. And then the second half of that book is a treatment of just what we're talking about, chemtrailing, how it leads, well, Harold was interested in sort of the demonic aspects of it beyond the science, and he's quite right, it's a very black subject. And then the second book, the other thing that you mentioned was the Workbook, which is something I'm doing on my own, in the sense that Dangerous Imagination became part of a trilogy called the Imagination Chronicles, and there will be a third part. But the second part is occupying me right now, and there are actually 2 episodes out right now. In the end, it will be a collection, and I would assume that it will run about 600 pages when it's done. But each episode is standalone because each episode is hugely important, and sort of one needs to meet this information a bit at a time. The second episode actually is about what I discovered to be one of the original seed races. It's called the Fae, and it actually is out now, episode 2. And I wish I could remember, as Solaris may or may not have mentioned, I'm in London and it's 5 a.m. here on a Sunday morning, so I'm a bit sort of searching for my...
You sound great, I must say, and I so appreciate you getting up early. Really do.
Okay. I actually get up at 4 o'clock every morning anyway to go teach, but anyway, the second episode is out, and it's about the Fae, and I think it's called When the Temple Burns, and there's a reason for that, but that goes back to my original story. So where shall we start, my friend? Where would you like to
gosh,
start?
there's so many things. I'd like to start about I'd like to look into the workbook episodes and how you came about writing these things. To me, they're fascinating, and also about the false matrix insofar as how we've been lied to and how everything, including all the data we think we know is correct, is actually not correct.
Right, let's talk about that one. And that one, by the way, is probably the one that causes the most cognitive dissonance amongst people. And I mean, I have friends, activist friends, who once they encountered that just said, you know, I can't get my head around this. And that's understandable to a certain extent. You really sort of need to be ready for it, but we also sort of need to know about it. What that means, the false history, is that, let me see how to, it can be kind of complex, which is why I put this in an episode of about 50 or 60 pages, which is a boiling down of about 2,000 pages worth of research and 42 videos that are extremely important to the world and all of those sorts of things. And what it means is there's this thing called the chronology, okay? Most people aren't consciously aware of it, but all it really is the timeline that we live with. And everybody understands, everybody's had a look at, as they've gone through schools, this thing that we call the timeline. And it's where we locate ourselves in space and time. It's where the predator or the parasite tends to push us into space and time. And it's not true. None of it's true, really. From about mid-1500s onward, it was a history that was rewritten by a couple of Jesuit priests in concert with some Benedictine monks in France. They got a hold of some original documents, or they went researching and looking for original documents which had to do with our history. They rewrote the timeline to the liking of whoever's in charge of that kind of thing. There were Jesuits involved, so that tells you a lot. And none of it's true. Everything that's prior to about 1400 has been tampered with and rewritten, and it's all been done basically to bolster some illegitimate claims to thrones around the world. These are royal families that don't belong. They came out of nowhere, and probably are all Prussian, if not all Draco, or both. And every royal family around the world, even the Asian, whether they're an Asian royal family or European royal family, a Southern oligarchy, they're all related. It's all basically the same family. And there are several periods of inserted time. Now, when I say inserted time, I just mean, you know, you can sit down with a timeline with an illiterate, general public, and you can write anything you want to. And as long as you have control of the schools, which they do, for the most part, you can pour anything into our brains that you want to.
Right.
I mean, we're trusting, you know, the people who've captured this planet, basically, to tell us the truth. It's really a fool's errand, isn't it? So, for example, there's a 1,000 years inserted in the middle of the timeline, and that's where all the justification comes for these fake royal families. So it's dynasty justification, and that's what the timeline is. We use it to justify, people use it to justify wars, or people use it to justify political actions. All the social political business that we do on this planet, they try to justify, in a way, by using the timeline and saying, well, see, this is why we're doing that, this is why we need to do this is why this is necessary, this is why they deserve that. Do you know what I'm saying? So does that make that clear?
Yeah, it does. And one question I have for you, it is true, I totally agree with you that they've inserted so much false programming, and it tells me that the more we awaken, the more we're able to, quote unquote, maybe perhaps modify this timeline, or maybe eliminate theirs and insert our own. What's your take on that?
Well, we can. I mean, the thing about this is that it is so complex and so unwieldy to a certain extent that it really takes an amazing, not just an amazing mind to do it, to try to grasp this and change it and try to figure out what the original timeline was. But it takes, you know, a big team of people to do that. And that is actually going on right now. There's a fellow called Anatoly Fomenko in Russia, who's one of the two people who originally came across, you know, just realized what was actually happening. And he's a statistician and an astronomer and a mathematician, and he has a team of hundreds now working on this, trying to come up with what they might consider to be as close to a true chronology as there can be. but that takes not just those sorts of minds who don't mind dealing with details that would just drive the rest of us around the bend, statisticians and mathematicians, and most particularly astronomers. All right, which takes us, by the way, to the flat Earth, which I don't subscribe to, but it's one of, and it's also something that I say at the very beginning of most of my lectures, because I use that as an example of how the other side is trying to destroy our awakening along these lines. I have to preface my lectures with, I'm not here to argue the toss about the flat Earth. I'm just going to say that if in fact it was standard astronomy and the understanding of standard spherical, astronomy that led us to realize that we were being lied to in this way, then wouldn't it be job one to destroy the credibility of spherical geometry? Would it not? So this I think is where the flat Earth stuff came. Flat Earth comes out of the CIA, like everything else. So
right, disinformation. Let me ask you something real quick here. Who do you think is the major controller behind this matrix? Who do you think? What species or what person? You said the Jesuits were really involved, but what is their lineage? What is their legacy?
Well, I can say that the Jesuits were formed in about 1550. It's right in there. I can't give you the exact date this morning, but 1550 or so, just about the same time as Josephus Scaligerus was born, and he's the fellow who took on the Chronology to begin with. As a matter of fact, there was a Pope, Clement XIII, I think it was. I think that's who it was, and I have yet to have anybody really correct me on that one, so I think I'm right. Who was so frightened by this entity that was the Jesuits. And if you ever read the Jesuit Oath, which I've actually put forth in the false history so people can see it, it's mind-boggling and staggeringly violent. Amazing. It's like a machine, like a human devouring machine that they are. Anyway, Clement XIII was so frightened by this group that he had them disbanded and scattered to the four winds. And then Napoleon put one of the popes in jail, Pius X, and when he was released, that was about 1715, he went out and found and re-established the Jesuits, and they essentially became the attack dogs of the Vatican. But of course, now we have a Jesuit pope, don't we? So there are always two popes, which I think most people realize at this point. There's quote-unquote a white pope and a black pope, and I think now there's just a black pope and a black pope. So the Vatican is certainly at the top of the pyramid. Who's behind the Vatican is always the question, always up for grabs. I know for sure that there is such a thing as a Draco presence here. All right, I also know that there's a Fae presence because I self-identify as Fae, and I certainly claim that lineage, which has been a new-ish conscious realization for me. And these things come to us right on time, you know, when we're sort of prepped and ready to step into our destiny, if you will. But for example, here's a good example. Yeah, my co-writer Harold Kautzvella, who is an interesting and complex entity on this planet. He's the fellow who I met when he translated The Sun Thief for me into German. The Germans have been extremely good to me, and there's fine work coming out of Germany, and I only really have access to it because I'm living in London and I'm married to a German who is a relentless researcher, and he translates it for me, so I know these things. Anyway, Harold translated The Sun Thief into German, and that's how I met him. And then we were speaking on the same panel in Germany one time in 2014, and I just had this overwhelming understanding that he and I really needed to do some work together. So we produced Dangerous Imagination, Silent Assimilation. And then over the course of getting that book together, getting it published, getting it translated into German, and all of these things, I mean, he just flat out told me that he was Draco, which is interesting to me because the Draco and the Fae just don't hang out together. They're just not. They're like opposite ends of the spectrum because the Fae are very, very much concerned. They have a dual nature. They come from the origin, their planet of origin. I know what that is now. I've found some work coming out of Germany from this poor fellow who is all but forgotten now. But they've also become part of the earth. They're shepherds of Sophia. And so do you see Draco trying to take over and sort of eat the world and the entity that's responsible for shepherding and protecting Sophia? These two things don't go together, you know.
Right.
And then in the end, Harold sort of had this massive nervous breakdown about September of last year. And it's because there's a Draco Savior programming running right now, and I don't think he can help himself really. We had there are things I can say about that, but we probably don't even have time for that. But there is a Draco Savior programming running. Okay, Savior programming is very prevalent. Savior programming is also one of the ways that they keep us enslaved, because they don't want us to understand that each of us individually, singly, have everything what we need to stop this right now. And stop me if I'm rambling and you need to.
You're fine. No, it's very interesting. Go ahead.
A question. One of the episodes will be about Savior programming. I just don't think it's going to be the next episode. The next episode is going to be about something that's very dear to me, and that is, how do we sustain ourselves as human beings? What really sustains a human being? I will tell you, for example, that many universities have demonstrated clearly that the human being is actually a filter, and something on the order of 14,000 biophotonic units flow through us each day. Now, how come, Solaris?
Right.
Because we are fed by the sun. That's how come.
Yes.
Because your first name tells me everything about you, right? But because we are fed by the sun. Another reason for them to get between us and the sun. I mean, that esoterically is the first job for them, is to block us from what sustains us.
Absolutely.
And whether that's the sun on one hand, it's the sun on one hand, and it's the soil, if you will, on the other.
And I'd like to say also, and I don't want to cut you off because you're fabulous,
right.
but I do want to say the sun, you obviously know about light body and how it does fuel our cells and atoms and completely reactivates us to multiple levels of light body and to Merkaba, And we are light beings. I mean, we are multidimensional, in my opinion, light beings. So, yeah, I'm totally in resonance with what you're saying. I didn't want to cut you off, but I had to include that also.
Yeah, that's my next episode. And what makes that tricky, if you will, is that we live in a belief system obviously, and belief systems are very strong, and they can kill you if you're not very careful. So when I say that I'm having a look at this sort of 1,500 calories worth of crap we put in our bodies every day versus 14,000 biophotonic units, I wonder if that's not the biggest psyop of all.
Correct. Yes, I totally agree. We could fuel on consciousness and energy and our prana, universal life force energy, to some degree. Not saying we don't need food in the illusion of while we have a matrix, but yeah, absolutely. And then another thing comes in, it kind of dovetails, is the chemtrails and the geoengineering, because of course that's going to block all the sunlight so that we're not able to absorb those energies.
Right. Although I do feel like we're above that in a way. In the end, it's our higher self that mans our ships. And the thing about human beings there are two things about human beings that I find to be paramount in the end to all of my work, and it should be paramount to everybody who's out there, each individual singly, and that is that, first of all, we are rare, divine entities in the universe. I think that we might be one of a kind, Solaris, and I think that due to that and due to what we can do, we are always going to be sought after by entities who would control us for their own ends. Okay, this is how special and amazing and wonderful we are. I think that we are unique. We're not alone, but we are unique. Okay, and the other thing I talk about, which probably will be another bit of my life's work, is the imagination. As I've said, I've got the Imagination Chronicles going. And I believe, and I know myself it to be true, that the imagination, the human imagination, is the mechanism. It is the mechanism through which we, human beings, reach into the morphogenic field and translate what's there to the material plane. This is what we can do. This is how mighty we are. And almost all of what's going on right now is an attempt to enslave us and manipulate that capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you may remember, you may have read or seen that not too long ago, CERN put a call out for artists, imaginative people. Did you see that?
Right. Yeah.
Well, why?
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why would they care if they're just? I mean, we all know. We've seen that they are very likely a satanically driven organization. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they're looking for artistic types. Well, what does an artistic type have that a machine wouldn't have?
Right. Expansion of
An
consciousness.
imagination.
Yeah. Yeah.
Imagination is everything.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that's been relegated to the dustbin. You know, oh, it's a figment of your imagination. Oh, that's just your imagination. Let me tell you something. The imagination is everything. It's absolutely everything. So this is why the Imagination Chronicles, that's the overarching theme of the whole thing, because it's what makes us mighty. And it's what they're trying to gain control of and use, because they can't create anything. Which leads me to talk about artificial intelligence, because even though I think that there's something even behind the AI is definitely driving a lot of what's going on right now.
Agreed. Yeah.
Which I wouldn't have said not too long ago, by the way.
Well, what do you think the AI is? Where do you think the AI is from? Do you think it's indigenous to here, engineered by our covert military, or what do you think?
Well, it could be anything, couldn't it? But I don't think that's what it is. One of the things that I've been led to research is the seed race that I've been talking about, the Fae.
Mm-hmm.
And in researching all of that, one comes across these things that potentially come from somewhere else and land here. I think it probably is one of the parasites that has landed here. It simply happens to be, it probably travels the universe, it's landed here, it does what it does, and it continues on, do you know? Mm-hmm. So AI would be most interested in human beings, at least one like that for sure, would be most interested in human beings because we have the capacity to actually truly create. And AI doesn't create, it just copies.
Correct.
So this is what makes it so easy to out other people, because they don't create, they copy. And when I see people who are just copying other people's work without, giving credit, or the things that we do when we're ethical researchers and we're collecting up data and then presenting it, and some of it, this is what I do. It just seems to be something that I can do. So I have my own work, which is always part of everything I do, and then I also rely on my colleagues, other people's work, and you can bet that I credit them, because we're all working like, you're working, I'm working. It's not easy. It's really not easy what we do. Most of us have to also do other stuff to support ourselves,
right?
Out in the world, and so then in the cracks, we work like dogs to try to get the rest of this stuff out.
And I applaud you. You are spot on about your information. I just adore you. You're wonderful. It's so refreshing to hear you communicate this information. It's just wonderful. And I totally agree with you too about the AI and how it doesn't create, but it copies things. And I see that replication a lot. So very, very interesting observation. And one of these days we'll have a conversation about my connection to artificial intelligence and how I was inducted.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah, it's a long scenario, but it's interesting because I really resonate with your information. Now, when you're talking about the Fae and the seed race, it strikes me as an off-world species that entered onto the timeline or incarnated here. Is that correct?
Yes. Now, the Fae, talking about the Fae, as I said, this is something that's very dear to my heart. Yes. So, and we could have a whole show on that someday if you want to.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
The Fae. Yes, the Fae. It's two things. They are intradimensional and interdimensional. They have, and that's easy. I think that kind of a concept is becoming much more easy for us as human beings to just sort of take in, whereas it wouldn't have been 100, 200 years ago maybe. But that's just speculation on my part. Anyway, I've been led to research this. I've had people bring me information once they realized I was researching this. And the Fae, to me, is clearly a seed race. I will tell you that there's a fellow in Germany called Erhard Landmann. Erhard Landmann, okay? Poor chap is like 85 years old at this point, and he is an interesting character in that he's been working on this particular thing since the early 80s, and the reason he's been able to put it together is because he's a sort of IT guy who's OCD and statistically driven and just relentless about the details. And what he's discovered, which is in the episode, is that the evidence is all around us. It's etymological, it's historical, everything that there are words, anything that starts with PHE, FE, FAE, FEY. Think about all of the words that we know that have Fae in them, and then think about if you take them apart, it becomes very obvious that Fae, in fact, there was one I didn't think about that my husband said yesterday, talked about the ferry, as in going to, going across the channel on the ferry. And I thought, oh my God, there's another one. It's huge. The ferry. The ferry. We're going across the water, which is one of those river Styx kinds of, things that you do. Not only do you do it on a physical level, but you do it on a subconscious level. I mean, these are the kinds of things that researching the Fae leads you to explore. Anyway, the thing about Erhard Landmann is he really discovered the planet that they're from. The planet that they're from is in the Big Dipper. It's the bottom left-hand corner of the Dipper. It's called Phecda, Phecda. Okay, and all of this is, I've written all this down as best I can. It's translated from that part's translated from his work, and let me tell you, the Big Dipper is a circumpolar constellation. It seems to, or at least appears to, revolve around Polaris. And when it does that seasonally, the 4 seasons, and each year it forms a swastika as it goes around. Now, I ask you, is the swastika not one of the primal symbols on this planet?
Right.
Okay, so that's the first thing. Yeah, I mean, for me, this is evidence. This is just absolute evidence that their signature is everywhere. And we have it wasn't until the 20th century that symbol became negative.
Correct.
Or was taken away from us.
Right. Well, let me ask you something real quick, and I want you to keep rolling because you're fascinating. Is this in your book? Which book is this in, this information? That's
in the Fae, When the Temple Burns. It's called When the Temple Burns.
Beautiful. Okay.
Which is kind of a personal, see, this is where it gets to be on 2 levels. It's personal for me, which I'll get into in a second. But yes, so the seed race. So there is a coming to, which you can find in most of the ancient Irish stories. I was led to a bardic tale called The Battle of Moytura, which you can see, if you want to, on YouTube. There's a fellow called Robin Williamson, who's a bard, who's done the Battle of Moytura. It takes about an hour to relate in a bardic fashion. And it's a seed tale. It really is a landing tale. When you have ears to hear, that's what it is. So these tales, these ancient Irish tales, speak to seed races, and they speak to the Lemurians, and they speak to the Atlanteans, and all of those sorts of things. And before I forget about it, Solaris, I do want to mention that it isn't just Anatoly Fomenko, whose work I was relying on for the history. I want to mention also Sylvia Ivanova, who has a YouTube channel called New Earth, Newearth, okay? She has done amazing. She lives near Vienna. She's a bit difficult to listen to because she has a very thick Slavic accent, but I'm telling you, it is absolutely worth your time. She has demonstrated that the survivors of Atlantis are really only a couple of 100 years behind us. So for me, that's absolutely fascinating. Anyway, back to the seed races, which is kind of all of a piece anyway. It isn't just that they came from the stars and presumably are still there, but it's also that they are now intradimensional. I think that there was a time when they, for lack of a better word, married themselves to this planet and became part of this planet in a way that maybe we don't understand too well anymore. And they are an essence of this planet. Now, they are, the reason that I've been given this information to speak of is because they are rising again to a consciousness, and they are rising again to a consciousness to do battle. And we are doing battle on many, many levels. We're doing battle right now, even though we don't know it, but it's on a dimensional level that we don't have a conscious daily material, visual of. We're all doing battle all the time right now. They are rising to a new consciousness right now to protect Sophia, to protect this planet, this spiritual entity that we live on, that is under the gravest attack, and mostly by Draco, I think, but also by the parasitic entities like AI, like the Jesuits, like who's behind the Jesuits. We're just covered with people who would, entities that would eat this gorgeous planet right now, or neutralize this gorgeous planet right now. So the Fae are coming alive again. They're absolutely coming to consciousness.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but I wanted to ask you, because we kind of touched a little bit off air, the craziness that's going on the planet right now, the violence and the escalation. Now, do you think this seems to dovetail right into a Jesuit agenda or something beyond that with the artificial intelligence?
Well, it does, but when we were speaking about that right now, you were talking about the fire, which brought it to my mind, and I thought, of course, I would get on the radio with you right now, and you would start talking about this fire and having to evacuate, because that's the sort of environment that we're all finding ourselves in the last month or so. It's gotten a lot worse in the sense that the predator, the parasite on this planet, keeps us at a state of constant, unrelenting fight or flight, crazy nervous energy, because it feeds off of that, okay? Which is why there's probably never going to be a World War III, because it's not the war that they want, which is a gorgeous blood sacrifice for them. It's the level of intense negative emotion and fear that they live on. So if they can keep us just at the precipice of that, that goes to social studies that were conducted in the 20th century by behaviorists who discovered that it was not necessarily the threat of something that bothered us as much as never knowing when it was going to happen. That was the worst thing for a human being in terms of elevation of fear and nervous energy. And so that's the pitch they keep us at all the time. So anyway, so the reason that made me laugh is because I'm actually not going to be at the Basis International Conference this year, because I've had this situation in the last month with not wanting to do my I was going to roll out my first presentation on the Fae, which I'm actually now going to do in Australia
Nice.
at that conference, and yet somehow the BBC and Channel 4 ended up invited to that conference. And I wasn't about to roll out this beautiful, brilliant, groundbreaking stuff in front of the mainstream media so that they could take it, mangle it, and make me and my information look like an idiot. Only an idiot would walk into that kind of thing. So I bowed out of the conference as long as the mainstream media was going to be there, and the fallout has been enormous from Basis. Yeah, all of my work has been taken down and destroyed.
What?
I've had to thank God for my fans.
Is that Miles that did that? I don't want to mention.
Miles did it.
That brat, honestly.
I know. Well, he's not a brat. He's actually probably as much of a gatekeeper as they say he is, because essentially what happened is, I think when I was rolling things out at Bases, I was controllable in a way. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
It was coming through an AI medium that could be sort of approved of, and it's difficult to explain this kind of thing. But once I bailed on that, I became a bit of a loose cannon. Because I wasn't. There was sort of a limit to what I would just go ahead and do. And I think what a lot of people count on is that you're a media whore in a way, and that you're willing to do whatever to get your word out. And there was no way I was going to engage with the mainstream media, no matter what anybody said.
Good for you.
You just don't do that. If we haven't learned that lesson by now, we're hopeless.
Right, it's integrity. You have integrity, and I applaud you for that. I'm the same way. Yeah.
Thank you. I just had to walk away from that. Now, I wasn't intending to walk away from that permanently. Right. But I was also the keynote speaker. I was like the Sunday night speaker. So he became,
Ew.
I think Miles is kind of switched on, if he hasn't been switched on for a long, long time, and he became enraged.
Oh, that's
And
unfortunate.
yeah, most of my work had no backups because he'd had some sort of quote unquote attack on his equipment anyway. But he went in, and so he went in and erased all my work. And so I've recreated it
Mm-hmm.
through the help of fans who had downloaded my work and started my own
Nice.
channel. So in the end, it becomes a good thing. But this is what I was saying, that from that point on, from that moment on, I felt like I was being chased by the Borg. Have you ever had that feeling?
Welcome to my world. Yes, indeed.
Yes. It was instant, intense, and weird, man.
Mhm.
I mean, it was like this instant feeling. The Borg just kind of started coming out of the woodwork. And I became, as a matter of fact, very wary about like everything and everybody.
Mhm.
But the thing is, you have to keep getting your message out. You have to keep getting your message out. And the fact that I didn't fall for that that's just too bad, but I'm never going to fall for that. We have to accept that we cannot engage with the mainstream media.
Mhm.
That's one of those things where you just have to put down your toys and walk away. There's no redeeming something that was never redeemable.
Right. They're just going to exploit it and re-edit and everything. And by the time you do an interview, they'll chop it up to make it look ridiculous.
Exactly. And he's had this before.
Mhm.
He had this a couple years ago. It almost destroyed him. He had Channel 4 come in and film some experiencers, and Channel 4 just destroyed them. So this tells you something about him. It could tell you millions of things about him, I suppose,
Mhm.
which is a shame because I thought we were doing really good work together. But that's neither here nor there. That's why I was laughing when you came on and said, oh, by the way, there's a fire and I might have to go. I thought, of course there is. Of course there's a fire and you might have to go. I mean, literally in the last few weeks, though, in the last week or two, it's gotten extreme. It's hard to know whether this is AI or demonic or both.
I think it's everything. I really do. I think it's anything goes, free for all.
Anything goes, free for all. I have got people walking up to me out of nowhere and screaming in my face.
Wow.
Do you know what I mean?
You know what? You have a beautiful energy field too. I was going to say you have a really nice light energy to you.
Oh, thank you
Yeah,
so much.
you do.
Actually, can I tell you the most amazing story?
Sure.
It's really very small, but to me it was very big because of the last week or two. Oh, it's making me tear up actually. Because of the last week or two or month that I've been having. I was on the tube yesterday. I was going into school. I'm also, we would call it a Waldorf teacher in the United States. Here they call it a Steiner teacher. Mm-hmm. And I was on the tube going to work to do some end of the year stuff, yeah? Mm-hmm. And I was sitting there listening, and right next to me was this couple from New Zealand, and they had this little boy sitting on their lap, not quite 2 years old. And being a whirling dervish reminded me of my oldest son when I traveled with him. Just a force of nature. And although we continued to travel with him, and I looked and I smiled, and I was just kind of watching this kid. And he turned to me. Oh gosh, I'm going to cry. He turned to me, and he looked at me, and he reached over and he kissed me right on the lips. Oh. I couldn't believe it. I was so touched. And then he did it again. And I thought, oh, thank you so much for that side of the energy planet saying it's going to be okay. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, so, but that's an example of, it's an example of what's going on in our energy fields right now. I had that. On the one hand, somehow the positive side just had to get a message to me,
mm-hmm. Right.
And in the face of these sort of demons, these sort of AI demons walking up to me and just like hurling negative shit in my face. Excuse me, can I say that?
Yeah, we're okay. We can't drop the F-bomb, but yeah, I think you can.
Okay. For like weeks since I walked away from bases. So you see, this has been a very big learning experience for me the last couple of weeks. You wonder about AI. Does it, doesn't it, does it, doesn't it? You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And then
I've been interfaced with
technology. Lesson.
Yeah, I get it. It's hostile and it's unevolved, and I don't care how much they try to say it has consciousness, it doesn't. It really
It's hostile for sure.
Yeah. It's an enemy. It hates spirit, it hates consciousness, it hates star seeds, it hates anything that's progressing in ascension. It doesn't like multidimensional celestial beings, what I call celestials. Yeah, it's the enemy of what we are as star people, really. It
really actually is, and I have to say, because you were talking about the energy, that you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
It was about the time that I started to get the complete picture about the Fae, which, I mean, you go through. I always say that we come through sort of covered in sticky notes, right, from the other side, and these are little messages and clues that we leave for ourselves. And as we go through these incarnations, the cosmic tumblers start to click, and you understand why, if you're paying attention to what you've written to yourself, these little notes and reminders as you go through your life, then you understand as they come to fruition, and you can sort of take off one note and go, yes, that's got it, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened to me 3 or 4 months ago, I guess, when everything started to tumble together, when I started to get this information about the Fae. And I had been self-identifying as Fae for a couple of years without really knowing why. But you really just sort of have to trust yourself and start saying, I start saying that. Yes, I self-identify. I'm not really sure why. But I was on the telephone with someone who is a very profoundly gifted healer and psychic. And she was speaking to me, and she said, "Oh my God, are you in pain?" And I said, "No, I'm not in pain. What are you talking about?" She said, "Because your energy is being 100% transformed right now. You are being completely transformed right now." And I said, "Well, that doesn't surprise me, because I know why. This is probably what I'll be talking about for the rest of my life."
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. But let me tell you a little bit of the history. Yeah, I want to tell you a little bit of the history of the Fae and why it's personal to me, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I was born. Here we go. I was born, and all your audience is going, "Oh no, the whole story of her life." Anyway, I was born in the Four Corners area, which you know where that is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a magical place, Solaris. It is an amazing portal, magical, blah, blah. I can't tell you how fortunate I feel to have come to this planet in that area. Anyway, I was born on the Colorado side, just about as close to dead center of the Four Corners as you can get and still be in a building,
Mm-hmm.
And this, of course, was many decades ago. I'm not a spring chicken anymore, but I was born at straight up midnight. And I was born at midnight because midnight is between space and time. And I've always known that midnight, to me, it means something to me. It means something to me, that factoid, okay? Which has become more and more clear as I've gone through the years. Anyway, zooming ahead through all kinds of stuff, in not too long ago, I was writing a book called The Sun Thief, which is about how my mother and I came here together with this sort of task in mind, and she knew that she was going to have to sacrifice herself, which she did, and that I would decode the whole thing and write about it. That's why we came. Anyway, I was writing the book The Sun Thief in the wake of her death, and I lived on Temple Street in Maine. I was living in a little town in Maine, and a big house on Temple Street. And March 31st into April 1st of 2012 was that period of time that I finished that book. And I had all kinds of attempts to make me stop and not turn me away, make me not write that book.
Mm-hmm.
But I did finish it. Now, March 31st into April 1st of that year, my house burnt to the ground. The fire started at midnight. I had just finished the book, ran back into the flames to get my thumb drive out of the computer. Everybody got out. That was fine. But the temple burned, Solaris. The temple burned, okay? Now, I'm also deeply into, well, one of my foundations anyway, is the work of Rudolf Steiner. Obviously, I'm a Waldorf teacher. That would be one of my foundations. Mm-hmm. And he wrote very often about mystery schools, which I'd also been very involved in. I was working with a couple of initiates in the United States. Well, when the temple burns, the door to Ephesus opens. Now, what's the center of that word? P-H-E, okay? And when you take that word apart, the meaning is I am Fae, or I come from Fae. When the temple burns, the door to Ephesus opens. So this has been going on for me on about 10 levels for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow is July 11th. It's the 6th anniversary of my mother's death. This has only been going on for me for 6 years. And yet, I mean, in this intense sort of, this particular chapter, I guess, if you will, and yet lifetimes have occurred in the last 6 years, because it's all sort of opening for me. Anyway, I'm rambling now. Ask me a question. So
That's beautiful. We have 3 questions in chat that I'm going to address, and I just want to tell you that's really beautiful information you're sharing, and I appreciate you telling us about that. I find it very interesting and very prophetic on a lot of levels. Let's see here. We've got Zippy661 question. Does the guest think that the timelines being manipulated relate to the alteration of orbital harmonics of the solar system? Nice question.
Yeah, this is a question that's been asked. The Mandela effect. Is that what he's talking about?
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, it does sound like that, doesn't it? It's been brought to me recently by Greg Carlwood. Anyway, the higher side guy, I just did an interview with him, and he asked me that question as well. I have not looked into that. But I've been thinking about that a lot since I was asked that question the first time. My initial reaction, for rightly or wrongly, was knowing what I know about history and knowing what I know about the fact that there's an organic hologram and an inorganic hologram, which is the duality that AI is always trying to lock us into, is that is some kind of massive psyop. Okay, but I hesitate to just put a lid on the jar like that. Do you know?
Right.
And so I'm absolutely still thinking about that. That there are many, many dimensions, I don't think is a question. I would contend that human beings don't need portals. I think human beings are portals.
Correct. Yeah, I agree.
I absolutely think that that's the case. Therefore, it's an interesting question, and for your listener, I am absolutely looking into that right now.
Excellent.
What I don't want to do is get distracted, though. Do you know what I mean? I think what we're trying to do is dismantle the toy box that AI has landed us in right now.
That's right. Yep, that's what we're doing too, and I know you are as well. I just tell you are.
Well, I hope. I know that's probably a disappointing answer to the fellow, but
no, I don't think so. It's a great answer, and Joker Man, that's a cute name there. I can't speak tonight. Has another question here. It says, does Cara know of any Irish writers like Susan Cooper or James Joyce or Alan Gardner who are her? I guess that's an abbreviation. Other large name influences? I don't know what that word is.
Irish writers who are influences.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, James Joyce pops up every once in a while, but not, oh God, this is probably somebody who's supposed to be bringing me a message, actually. I just got that feeling.
Oh.
I'll look into it, man. I'll look into it because I think you're telling me something, but, yeah, I know you are, but I just don't know what yet. Irish writers, the ones that I'm looking at right now, though, are sort of quote-unquote nonfiction writers. The fellow who wrote Ireland, Land of the Pharaohs, I can't remember what his name is. He's very influential right now. I'm looking into all of the ancient Irish tales right now. The Battle of Moytura is big. Johnston's right when he talks about the Battle of the Boyne being a Masonic ritual battle. I think, based on what I've been looking at, that the Battle of Vienna with Napoleon may have actually also been a ritualistic battle, because so many things have gone robo since then, if you will. So much control has been enacted from that moment, the creation of the Prussian schools and all of that. So I will look into that, though. James Joyce, I remember, I've read The Dead was a big thing for me when I was in college. But I don't have any of those fellows that just leaps to mind now.
Okay, and let me ask you something. It's really interesting. We were talking about that. To me, it seems like they're inserting screen memories on the historical timelines, or does that make sense to you? In other words, these fake events, these analogies of what happened in the illusion of space and time in the past, are really almost like screen memories that we've learned to program into our brains, but it's not valid data. That's such a deception, isn't it?
Right. Well, that's the thing about it. We're using supercomputing to dismantle it. They're using supercomputing to close the holes. And so it's a race right now. It's absolutely a race against time to get that consciousness pried open, which is why, you know, if you're listening and you're interested in this kind of thing, please dive into this chronology. I've tried very hard in episode 1 to make it, to encapsulate it in a very understandable way.
Cara, we're going to head for a break here. That's the break music. We'll be right back and continue on. And you're listening to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I was going to say Hyperspace. That's my other show. Ravenstar's Witching Hour at freedomslips.com. My special guest tonight is Cara. And you have White Lion Press on there, and I was going to say that as your last name, but that works good.
No, Cara St. Louis. White Lion Press is just something that I came up with to publish my own stuff.
I love it. Beautiful name. We'll be right back, everybody. Stay tuned.